We are the higher self of the one, known to this instrument in the language terms as Isaac Rolla, whose cycle of incarnation started on the time-space known as 1995 of the linear spacetime continuum. We are now communicating with you via the love and light of the One Infinite, Creator, and our communication is now starting through this instrument. Before we start our communications, we would like to warn you that you should only accept insights which provide a deeper sense of resonance with your heart sequence and leave behind those thought forms which do not resonate with your inner self. We are in essence communicating now from the density known as the sixth density consciousness, the density wherein there is only unity and no separation exists. We are now going to share with you one timeline only of the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity, who started its first density experiences after originating from the one creator on the Andromeda star planets around 11 million years ago. On that level of experience, this entity was known by the soul name of Kumara, as known in your language terms in the language terms of the Andromedans. In the first density experience, this entity spent the life cycle in the form of a water element, learning the lessons of beingness on this level. This furthermore allowed this entity to evolve and reach into the beginning sub-octaves of the second density, wherein it began to learn the lessons of that of experience, similar to your plant life, as found in your planetary sphere, which allowed this entity to gain the experience of learning of the lessons of awareness. This furthermore allowed this entity to enter into the later sub-octaves of the second density, wherein it began to resemble the animal life form similar to the so-called pets as found on your planetary level. However, this experience occurred on the same star system in which it had originated in. This entity then, after a period of around 11,500 years of learning the lessons on this level, graduated directly into the third density consciousness experience, which further allowed this entity's experience to deepen on that level. And this entity was able to learn the lessons of interaction with the outside environment or the outside catalytic environment, which allowed this entity to reach into the required density level of the later sub-octaves of the third density, and was transported to the Earth's Atlantis, mind, body, and spirit totality for the purpose of learning the lessons of the later sub-octaves of third density. On the level of the third density consciousness, this entity began to learn many lessons and started to move upwards in the spiral of third density consciousness, and finally gained a large amount of experience, which allowed this entity to then reach into the later sub-octaves of the third density consciousness, which allowed this entity to then incarnate on the current Earth timeline for the purpose of learning the lessons of the later sub-octaves of third density. This entity then incarnated on the Earth planet in the form of a human, mind, body, and spirit totality, with the main objective in this life cycle being that of focusing on the aspect of choosing the pathway of polarization. However, this entity had some karma from the previous incarnation because it had taken part in the destruction of the previous incarnation cycle, and the karma collected in that incarnation had to be repaid by this entity's consciousness. This entity then incarnated on the timeline of 1611. In that level, this entity was known by the name of Paramar, and in that incarnation cycle, it was able to gain the experience and the understanding in the form of a man-body complex, which further allowed this entity's progress to be of a faster nature in that incarnation. This entity, for the purpose of repaying its karma from the previous past incarnation, had incarnated in the form of a physical vehicle of undesirable nature, which led this entity to then cross over on the timeline of 1664. This furthermore allowed this entity to then transition into the next incarnation cycle, which began on 1812. In that incarnation, it was known by the name of Allison, and this entity in that incarnation was able to learn the lessons of the aspect of balancing of the lower chakras, of the red ray, the orange ray, and the yellow ray energy center, which need to be balanced by each entity, because without the balancing of the lower chakras, no entity would be able to transition higher. And this entity then crossed over on the timeline of 1880 after having learned many of the lessons on this level. Furthermore, after this entity reincarnated on this current space-time on 1995, with the main purpose of this incarnation being that of learning to choose the pathway of love and to transition into the higher sub-octaves of consciousness. In this incarnation, it still has to learn the lesson of forgiveness of the self in order to transition higher. Hence, we leave you, beloveds, in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Bye.